My name is Claire. I'm a 34-year-old senior food safety compliance officer living in the city, and the night my brother Marcus called me a lunch lady in front of 300 people was the same night he found out exactly who I had become while he wasn't looking. Let me set the scene for you because it matters. The room was already full when I walked in. 300 people dressed in cocktail dresses and perfectly tailored suits. Champagne flutes catching the warm gold light that poured down from the chandeliers overhead like something out of a magazine spread. The kind of event where everything is curated. The flowers, the lighting, the music floating just beneath the conversation. Where every detail exists to communicate one single message. We have arrived. I had arrived late on purpose. Not because I was nervous, though my hands were doing something strange and cold in the parking garage elevator. I was late because I needed to be there, but I did not need to be seen. Not yet. Not on his terms. I stood near the back of the ballroom, close to the tall windows that overlooked the city skyline, all orange and white lights stretching out into the October dark, and I watched my brother Marcus stand at the center of it all like he had been born for exactly this moment. Because in his mind he absolutely had been. He was laughing at something a man in a gray suit was saying, that same loud, full-bellied, room-filling laugh I had heard my entire life. The kind of laugh that expanded to claim every cubic inch of available space, and left nothing for anyone else. The kind of laugh that said, I am the main character. Everyone else is set decoration. The gala was his. All of it. The banner above the stage read Harvest and Grace Catering, 10 years of excellence in gold letters on white fabric, and beneath it, Marcus moved through the crowd like a man who didn't just believe his own mythology. He had written it, illustrated it, and handed out signed copies at the door. Beautiful people orbited him. City officials. Investors. People with titles and checkbooks. He touched shoulders and threw his head back and pointed at people like they were old friends even when they weren't. And it worked because it always worked because Marcus had a gift that I had spent years learning to acknowledge without bitterness. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, and I watched him and I waited. Let me take you back. Not to the very beginning. There are too many beginnings in a story like this, too many small moments that each feel like the real starting point, but to the one that shaped everything else. The one that built the architecture of who we became to each other. I grew up in a house where Marcus was the investment and I was the afterthought. I want to say that plainly and without drama because it is simply the most accurate description I have. That is not bitterness talking. That is just the blueprint of how our family functioned, the load-bearing structure beneath everything we called normal. Marcus was 4 years older than me, effortlessly charming in the way that some people are just born, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and within 10 minutes make every single one of them feel like they had specifically been waiting for him to arrive. My parents saw it early, this quality in him, this magnetism, and they watered it accordingly. Religiously even. The better school. The car at 16. The business loan at 22. No questions asked. No repayment plan discussed. No expectation of accountability attached. Just belief, unconditional and abundant, poured directly into him like sunlight into a greenhouse. I do not resent the fact that they loved him. I want to be clear about that. I resent that they taught him through every choice they made, every sacrifice they directed toward him and away from everything else, that loving one person completely meant diminishing another. That there was a fixed amount of pride available in our family, and it had already been allocated. By the time I was in college, I had learned to make myself small around Marcus. Not because I was small, I was not, and some quiet, stubborn part of me always knew that, but because every time I forgot to make myself small there was a cost. A comment at dinner. A look exchanged between Marcus and my mother. Fast and subtle. The kind that doesn't need words. The particular and devastating silence that follows when someone says something specifically designed to remind you of your place. I became fluent in that silence. I learned to read it the way you learn to read weather. I studied food science and public health. It was not glamorous. It was not the kind of major anyone brags about at holiday dinners when relatives are asking what you're going to do with your life. It was the kind of field you go into because something in you is drawn to the invisible infrastructure that keeps people safe, the systems that work best when no one thinks about them. When I told Marcus what I was studying, he laughed, the big laugh, the room-filling one, and said, "So what, you're going to be a lunch lady?" My mother smiled at him reflexively, the way she always smiled at his jokes. My father did not look up from his plate. I graduated with honors. I passed every licensing exam on the first attempt. I took a job with the city's Department of Health and Human Services, Food Safety Division, entry level, $41,000 a year. The kind of job that doesn't impress anyone at Thanksgiving. Marcus made sure I knew, without ever being cruel enough to be called out on it, that his first-year revenue at Harvest and Grace had been 4 times that. He mentioned it at Christmas. He mentioned it at my mother's birthday dinner. He mentioned it in the specific casual way people mention things they want you to feel. For 8 years I did the work. I showed up. I documented everything. I took every continuing education course available, every federal certification, every advanced training module on outbreak investigation and large-scale food handling compliance that crossed my desk. I was promoted, then promoted again. I developed a reputation in my department for thoroughness, for the kind of methodical, patient attention to pattern that makes the difference between catching a problem and missing it until it becomes a crisis. I loved the work with a quiet intensity that I never bothered to explain to anyone in my family because they had never once asked. By the time Marcus started talking about taking Harvest and Grace to the next level, landing the kind of large institutional city contracts that would make it as valuable as he believed it was, that would cement the mythology he'd been building for a decade. I was the senior food safety compliance officer for District 7 of the city's Department of Health and Human Services. District 7 covered every commercial kitchen, every catering commissary, and every mobile food operation within a 12-mile radius of Marcus's flagship location. He did not know. I need to explain that carefully because every single person I have ever told this story to asks the same question. How did he not know? The answer, when you actually examine it, is simple and a little devastating. My brother had not once in 8 years asked what I actually did. Not at Thanksgiving. Not at the birthday dinners my mother still insisted on hosting every year in the name of family. Not when I mention work in passing. He nodded. He moved on. He redirected every conversation back to himself with the kind of practiced, seamless ease that looks completely natural until you realize you have watched it happen 1,000 times and it has never once varied. He knew I worked for the city. He had decided somewhere in the first year that it was something administrative. Something small. Something that did not require understanding. I was filed away in the part of his mind reserved for background details and left there. I knew everything about his operation. Harvest and Grace catered corporate events, charity galas, political fundraisers. The food was genuinely beautiful. Elegant presentations, thoughtful menus, the kind of catering that photographs well and tastes even better. Marcus had real talent and I had never not once denied that. The man could build a menu the way some people compose music. But over the past 2 years, my office had received 3 separate formal complaints about their commissary kitchen. Temperature violations. Improper cold storage during off-site transport. A walk-in cooler unit that had failed a calibration check not once but twice. The second failure coming only 4 months after the first corrective action was supposedly completed. Each time the documentation had been corrected on paper. Each time they had passed reinspection. But a pattern is a pattern, and patterns don't lie the way paperwork sometimes does. Then, 6 months before the gala, one of his catering vans transported food for a corporate lunch on a warm Thursday in March. By Friday morning, 47 people had reported symptoms. By Friday afternoon, 2 of them were in the hospital. The outbreak was traced back to a holding temperature failure during transport. Food that had been kept in a danger zone long enough to become genuinely hazardous. My office investigated. The report went up the chain. A formal compliance review was opened. Marcus's lawyers knew about the review. Marcus himself knew about the review. He had received the official notification. He had responded through counsel. What he did not know, what had apparently never crossed his mind to wonder, was who was sitting at the head of the table running it. He had never connected my name at work, my professional identity, to the sister he thought of as background noise. It never occurred to him to look. 3 months before the gala, he called me on a Sunday evening. His voice had that particular quality it gets when he needs something warm and slightly overfamiliar, like you're being granted access to a version of him that's usually reserved for more important people. He said his company was up for a major city contract. Large-scale event catering for municipal functions. Worth nearly $2 million annually if secured. The application required a letter of character from someone with standing in the community, And he asked with the breezy confidence of someone who has never had to work very hard to get what he wants from the people around him, if I knew anyone in city government who might be willing to write one. I said I would see what I could do. I did not write the letter. I did not make any calls. I went back to my desk the next morning, and I opened the compliance file that had been sitting in my queue for 90 days, and I kept doing my job. Because that was the job. That was what the 47 people who got sick in March deserved. That was what the 2 people who ended up in hospital beds deserved. That was what every person who would ever eat food catered by Harvest and Grace deserved. Someone doing the job without flinching, without favoritism, without looking the other way because it was inconvenient or uncomfortable or because the person at the center of the file happened to share her last name. The gala was the final showcase before the contract decision. Marcus had assembled it with the precision of a man who understood that perception, in his world, was almost as powerful as reality. He had invited city officials, local investors, 3 members of the city council, 2 state representatives, and enough people from the municipal contracting office to constitute a soft lobbying effort dressed up as a celebration. It was meant to be the capstone moment. The event that demonstrated to everyone who mattered that Harvest and Grace was exactly the kind of polished, professionally operated, trustworthy company the city should be writing large checks to. He had catered the event himself, naturally. Every detail under his personal supervision. I had been invited 2 weeks earlier. A +1 email from my mother, forwarded to me with a note that said Marcus wanted family there to show his roots. To demonstrate that beneath the chandelier and the gold banner, he was still a man who came from somewhere real. I had RSVP'd yes. He had not called to confirm. He had not called at all. He had not spoken to me since the Sunday evening phone call about the character letter that I had not written. Standing at the back of that ballroom with my glass of sparkling water, watching the chandeliers catch the light and throw it back in 100 directions, I felt something settle in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't anger exactly. It was older than anger. It was the thing that lives underneath anger when anger has been sitting there long enough to become something structural. I watched Marcus catch sight of me across the room. He raised his chin. Just his chin, not a wave, not a smile, not any gesture that would require him to acknowledge me as someone worth crossing the room for. Just the minimum. The absolute floor of recognition. I nodded back. A woman standing next to him, elegant, mid-40s, the kind of compose that comes from decades of being the most capable person in every room, leaned in and said something to him. He shook his head slightly. The way you do when you're quietly assuring someone that something isn't worth their attention. I watched him do it. I watched him dismiss me from a distance of 40 feet, the same way he had been dismissing me from across dinner tables my entire life, and I felt the heat begin to move through my chest. I set the sparkling water down. Then I picked it back up. I wasn't ready yet. The formal program began at 8. The lights shifted, the room gathered, and Marcus took the stage to a wave of warm, genuine, well-earned applause. He was good at this, standing at a podium, microphone in hand, 300 faces turned toward him like sunflowers. He was easy and charismatic and funny in exactly the right measure, and he talked about Harvest and Grace's journey with the kind of practiced emotional intelligence that made everyone in the room feel like they were hearing something personal. He talked about his team. He talked about his vision for the next decade. He talked about what it meant to build something from nothing, and as he said it, I thought about the business loan at 22 with no repayment plan, and I thought about the things we call nothing. Then he said he wanted to take a moment to acknowledge family. He looked out into the room. He found me. He pointed, and 300 heads turned in my direction, and I stood there in the back of the ballroom with my glass of sparkling water and let them look. My little sister is here tonight, Marcus said, and his voice carried the particular warmth of a man performing generosity for an audience he wants to impress. The warmth of a man who has decided that acknowledging someone costs him nothing because they cost him nothing. She has always been the quiet one in our family. Light laughter from the crowd. Easy, indulgent, the kind of laughter that follows a man who has spent years training rooms to laugh when he wants them to. She works for the city, handles some kind of food service administration, I think. He paused. Let the next part land with the timing of someone who has told jokes his whole life and knows exactly how to pace a punchline. Honestly, I think she's basically a lunch lady, but we love her anyway. The laughter that followed was not cruel. That is the thing that is hardest to explain. The people in that room were not bad people. They were laughing at what they thought was a warm, self-deprecating family moment. A successful man gently ribbing his little sister. The kind of relatable, humanizing detail that makes powerful people seem approachable. They didn't know. They had no way of knowing. And Marcus was already moving on, his smile intact, his momentum unbroken, his narrative continuing forward the way it always did, rolling over everything in its path. I felt the heat move from my chest to my face. I felt it arrive in my hands, in my jaw, in the place behind my eyes where tears would have been if I had been a different person in a different moment. But I wasn't. And I wasn't going to cry in the back of this ballroom, while my brother explained to 300 people that I was basically a lunch lady. I let the heat arrive. I let it settle into something solid. And then I put the sparkling water down on the table beside me, and I walked toward the stage. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think honesty is the only thing that makes this story worth telling. It was not pure confidence. It was not the clean cinematic certainty of someone who has rehearsed this moment. My hands were not steady. I had thought about this. I had turned over different versions of it on different nights, lying awake with the compliance file open on my laptop and the city quiet outside my window, but I had never planned the exact sequence of what I was about to do. What was underneath the planning, underneath the nervousness, was something much simpler and much older. It was the accumulated weight of every dinner table comment, every redirected conversation, every year of building something real and being told, in 100 small and quiet ways, that it didn't count because it wasn't visible enough, wasn't loud enough, wasn't his. And something in me had simply decided that tonight, in front of the exact audience he had so carefully assembled to witness his greatest triumph, I was going to be seen. Not for him. For me. For the 47 people who got sick in March. For the 2 who ended up in the hospital. For every version of myself that had stood in the back of a room and made herself small so that someone else could take up more space. A staff member near the base of the stage saw me coming with what must have looked like purposeful authority. She stepped aside without a word. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage and I crossed toward Marcus with the kind of steady, deliberate pace that I had spent 8 years developing in kitchens and commissaries where people tried to rush you or rattle you or make you feel like you didn't belong. He turned as I approached and his smile stayed in place for exactly 2 seconds. 2 full, practiced, professional seconds, before something behind his eyes shifted and the smile began to falter at its edges. "Hey," he started. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. The room went absolutely still. Not the polite stillness of an audience waiting for the next speaker. The stunned stillness of 300 people who have just watched something happen that they cannot immediately categorize. My brother was very still beside me. I could feel the quality of his stillness, not calm, nothing like calm. The coiled, calculating stillness of a man who is rapidly reassessing a situation that has moved outside his control. I turned to face the room. 300 faces, all of them looking at me. The chandeliers above, indifferent and bright. The gold banner behind me. The city through the tall windows beyond. I took one breath, just one, slow and deliberate, and I said in a voice that was calm and clear and carried to every corner of that ballroom without effort, "I appreciate the introduction. I'd like to clarify a few things if you'll give me a moment." Someone in the back laughed nervously, the instinctive social reflex of a person who doesn't yet know what they're witnessing. Then silence again, deeper than before. "My name is not relevant for these purposes," I said. "What is relevant is my title." I paused just for a moment, not for drama, but because what I was about to say deserved a beat of its own. I am the Senior Food Safety Compliance Officer for District 7 of the city's Department of Health and Human Services. I have held that position for 4 years. Before that, I spent 4 years as a field inspector in the same district. I heard someone shift in their seat. I heard the particular quality of silence that means a room is doing math. District 7, I continued, covers every commercial kitchen, every catering commissary, and every mobile food operation within a 12-mile radius of this building. I let that land, including Harvest and Grace Catering. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of understanding arriving in a room all at once. I saw faces change. I saw 3 city council members, people I recognized, people whose offices I had passed documents through for years, go very still in their seats. My office has been conducting a formal compliance review of this company for the past 90 days, I said. That review was triggered by a foodborne illness outbreak in March of this year. 47 individuals reported symptoms. 2 people were hospitalized. I did not look at Marcus when I said this. I kept my eyes on the room, on the faces, on the people who had a right to know what I was about to tell them. The investigation found systemic temperature control failures in the transport and holding protocols of this company. Not a one-time mistake. A pattern documented across multiple inspections over a 2-year period. Behind me, Marcus's voice came low and tight, barely controlled. What are you doing? It was not a question. It was a threat wearing the punctuation of a question. I'm clarifying, I said, without turning to look at him. You introduced me to your guests. I thought they deserved to know who they were meeting. I looked back out at the room. The deputy director of the contracting office was in the 4th row. I had not known she would be there until I saw her name on the guest list 2 days before the gala. And when I saw it, something in my chest had gone very quiet and very certain. The compliance review will conclude next week, I said. The findings will be submitted to the contracting authority as part of the standard disclosure process required for any vendor seeking a city contract. That is not retaliation. That is procedure. It was always going to happen regardless of tonight, regardless of anything else. The only variable, the only choice I made, was whether the people in this room knew about it before or after the contract decision was made. I set the microphone down on the stand beside me. Then I turned to Marcus. He had gone completely pale. Not the pale of embarrassment. The pale of a man whose entire landscape has shifted beneath him without warning. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the rapid calculation I had watched him perform my whole life, the quick inventory of who had power and how to get it back, who could be leveraged and who could be appealed to, how to reshape a narrative that had just escaped his hands. Except this time the inventory kept coming up empty. This time the variables didn't resolve the way they always had. This time the person standing in front of him was not background noise. I looked at him for a long moment. Just him. Just us briefly in the middle of all those people. You always said my work wasn't real, I said quietly. Quietly enough that it was only for him. I just wanted you to know that it was. I walked off the stage. Behind me, the room began to murmur. A low swelling sound that rose and fell in waves as I moved toward the exit. I heard Marcus step back to the microphone. I heard him say something in a voice that had lost its earlier ease, something attempting to regain control of the room, but I didn't catch the words and I didn't try to. Some doors once walked through don't require looking back. A woman in a deep blue dress caught my arm near the exit. She pressed her business card into my palm without saying a word, just a firm, deliberate press of cardstock against skin, and then released me and stepped back. I recognized her name later, when I was sitting in my car in the parking structure with the engine off, and the October cold seeping in through the glass. She was the deputy director of the contracting office, the person who would be signing off on the vendor decision. Outside, the October air was cold and sharp and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened. The city spread out beyond the parking structure in orange and white lights, enormous and unmoved. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and I breathed. Just breathed. In and out. The air tasted like cold concrete and distant exhaust and something that might have been relief, though it was too early to be certain. My phone buzzed within 4 minutes. Marcus's name on the screen. I looked at it. I let it ring. It buzzed again. Then again. Then a text from my mother. What did you do? Call me. I put the phone in my pocket and walked to my car, and sat in the dark for a while before I drove home. He called 11 times that night. I know because I counted them the next morning. Standing in my kitchen with coffee going cold in my hand, scrolling through the missed calls the way you read a document you need to fully understand before you respond to it. 11 calls. I listened to all the voicemails in order once through and then I deleted them. The first voicemail was controlled anger, the professional kind, the kind that still has a veneer of reasonableness stretched over it, the kind that is somehow more frightening than the uncontrolled version because you can feel how much is being held back. He said I had made a scene. He said I had been unprofessional. He said we needed to talk. The second was louder. The veneer had thinned. By the fourth voicemail, the word sabotage had appeared. He said I had sabotaged him. He said I had used my position to settle a personal score, and that there would be consequences for that. He said he had lawyers. By the 7th, his voice had changed into something I had not heard from him before. Something thinner, less certain. The particular vocal quality of a man who has spent his whole life moving forward with confidence and has just encountered something that does not yield to confidence. Something that was built on different foundations entirely. By the 11th voicemail he said please. I had heard Marcus say please to my parents when he was 19 and needed the business loan. I had heard him say please to early investors and to clients who were wavering. I had never, in 34 years of being his sister, heard him say please to me. I listened to that 11th message twice. Then I deleted it along with the others. My mother called the next morning at 8:15. I answered because I always answer for her. Some habits of love are deeper than the complications that accumulate around them. She asked me why. She asked it the way she asks things when she has already decided the answer, not as a genuine question, but as an opening for the explanation she wants to give. She said I had embarrassed the whole family. She said I had done it out of jealousy, that I had never been able to stand watching Marcus succeed, that I had been waiting for a moment like this. She used the word ungrateful in a way that implied the debt was mine, that I owed something for having existed in proximity to his ambition all these years, that the favor of being included in his story was something I had repaid very poorly. I let her finish. I did not interrupt. I waited until the silence on the line told me she was done. Then I said, Mom, 47 people got sick. 2 of them were hospitalized. That is what my job is about. That is the whole story. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, the small sounds of a woman sorting through her feelings in real time. You could have handled it differently, she said finally. He introduced me as a lunch lady in front of 300 people, I said. In front of city officials and investors and everyone whose opinion he has spent 10 years cultivating. He has been handling me differently my whole life, Mom. I just finally stopped letting him. She didn't have an answer for that. Or if she did, she chose not to give it to me. We stayed on the line for a moment in that particular kind of silence that exists between people who love each other and have run out of language for what they're actually trying to say. Then she said she had to go. I said okay. I said I loved her. She said she loved me too, and I believed her, and it didn't resolve anything, and I put the phone down and went to work. The formal compliance findings were submitted 8 days after the gala. I had not rushed them and I had not delayed them. The report cited 2 categories of critical violation, 3 categories of major violation, and a documented pattern of repeat non-conformance that indicated systemic, rather than incidental failure. Meaning this was not a company that had made isolated mistakes and corrected them. This was a company with structural problems in its safety protocols that had been papered over again and again, with corrective action plans that addressed the symptom and not the disease. Harvest and Grace was placed on a formal corrective action plan. The city contract, the nearly $2 million annual contract that the entire gala had been designed to secure, was awarded to a different vendor, pending the outcome of the plan. 3 days after the findings were submitted, Marcus's attorney sent a formal letter to my department. The letter alleged bias and conflict of interest in the review process. It alleged that I had used my position to retaliate against a family member for personal reasons. It requested a full external audit of every decision made during the 90-day review. My department granted the request without hesitation, because that is what you do when your work is clean. You invite the scrutiny. The external audit took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of an independent review team going through every document, every inspection record, every internal communication, every decision log from the moment the review was opened to the moment the findings were filed. I cooperated fully. I provided everything they asked for. I answered every question. The audit confirmed procedural integrity across all phases of the review. The conflict of interest claim failed for a reason that Marcus's attorney apparently had not anticipated. At the start of the review 90 days earlier, I had disclosed our family relationship in writing to my department supervisor. It was a 2-paragraph memo, dated and filed and sitting in my personnel record. I had disclosed it because that is what you do when a review lands on your desk that involves someone you are related to. You disclose. You document. You create a record. And then, if your supervisor determines that the relationship does not compromise the objectivity of the review, which mine had, because the relationship had never involved any professional overlap, And because Marcus had never once disclosed to anyone that his compliance officer was his sister, you proceed. I had documented everything. I had been documenting everything for 8 years. That is the part of the story that people who know me were not surprised by at all. Marcus called one more time 6 weeks after the gala. By then the audit was complete, the findings were confirmed, and the contract had been formally awarded elsewhere. I let his first call go to voicemail, and then, after sitting with it for a day, I called him back. Because I decided that whatever needed to be said between us should be said directly and should be finished, and it was better to have it over with than to let it sit indefinitely in the space between us like something neither of us would name. He answered on the second ring. He did not apologize. I want to be precise about that because the absence of an apology is itself a kind of information. He said he understood that I had a job to do. He said he thought I should have found a way to do it without making it a spectacle, without putting the family in that position, without choosing the most public and damaging possible moment to do what I could have done quietly through official channels. He said the family had been through a lot. He said he needed to know if I was willing to move forward. I thought about every dinner table. I thought about the particular silence that follows when someone says something designed to remind you of your place. I thought about the lunch lady comment and the 300 faces turning toward me and the way his chin had moved, just his chin, when he saw me across the ballroom. The minimum. The absolute floor. I've been moving forward my whole life, I said. You just weren't watching. I hung up. Here is what I want to say about what people call revenge, because I think the word is almost always wrong and I think it matters to get it right. What I felt in that ballroom was not revenge. Revenge is what you do to make yourself feel better at someone else's expense, when the primary goal is your own satisfaction, and the secondary goal is their suffering. What I did was my job. I had a disclosure obligation. The contracting authority had a legal and ethical right to know what was in that compliance file before they made a decision involving public funds and public safety. Every single element of what I said on that stage was something I would have been required to communicate through official channels within the week regardless of anything else that happened that night. The findings were going to the contracting office. The pattern was going to be documented. The contract decision was going to be informed by the review. All of that was already in motion. The only choice I made was when. And yes, I made that choice at a moment that was maximally inconvenient for someone who had spent 30 years making my existence feel like an inconvenience. I made it in front of the exact audience he had assembled to witness his crowning achievement. I made it 30 seconds after he pointed at me in front of 300 people and called me a lunch lady for the second time in my life, and I am at peace with that. I am completely and entirely at peace with that. The corrective action plan took 7 months to complete. I was not the lead on the monitoring process. I had recused myself from ongoing oversight of Harvest and Grace following the findings, which is standard practice and which I had planned from the beginning. A colleague took over. 7 months of documented improvements, re-inspections, calibration verifications, protocol overhauls. At the end of it, Harvest and Grace passed. They remained in operation. Marcus kept his company. He kept his livelihood, his team, his decade of work. The only thing he lost was the city contract for that cycle and the version of the story where I was background noise. I ran into one of the city council members from the Gala at a public health conference 4 months later. She was standing near the registration table with a coffee she hadn't opened yet, and when she saw me, something in her expression shifted. Not discomfort, something more like recognition. She said she had thought about that night more than once. She said she was glad she had been in the room. I thanked her and didn't ask her to elaborate, because some things carry their own meaning and don't need to be unpacked. The woman in the blue dress, the deputy director whose business card had been pressed into my palm at the exit, had done something with my name. She had passed it, along with some context I can only partially reconstruct, to someone in the state health office. In January, for months after the Gala, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. A senior policy role. Statewide oversight of food safety compliance and outbreak response. Nearly double my current salary. The kind of position that doesn't get posted publicly because the people doing the hiring already know who they're looking for. I submitted my application on a Tuesday afternoon from my desk during my lunch break. I wrote the cover letter the night before, at my kitchen table, with the city lights visible through my window and the October memory of cold air still somehow present even though it was January and the heat was on. I wrote about 8 years of field work. I wrote about outbreak investigation. I wrote about what it means to build a system that protects people who will never know they need it protecting. I got the job. I told my mother first because she is still my mother, and some habits of love do not dissolve no matter how complicated the love becomes, no matter how many difficult phone calls accumulate around it. I called her on a Wednesday evening, and I told her I had been offered a position with the state health office, and that I had accepted it. There was a pause on the line, and then she said congratulations. She said she was proud of me. It was the first time I could remember with any clarity, that she had said that without the word but following it. Without the qualifier, the small retraction, the thing that took the gift back just as it was being offered. Just, I am proud of you. Plain and whole and hers to give. I thanked her. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, her garden, the neighbor's new dog, a restaurant she'd been to with her friends, and it was the most comfortable conversation we had managed in years. I did not bring up Marcus. She did not bring up Marcus. We just talked. I did not call Marcus to tell him about the job. He found out through my mother, the way news had always traveled in our family, through the person in the middle who is trying to hold something together that has already decided what shape it wants to be. He sent me a text message 3 days after I started the new position. It said, "Congratulations." One word. No punctuation after it. No explanation. No further message. Somehow, in its stripped-down bareness, it felt like the most honest thing he had ever communicated to me. Not warm, not generous, not performed. Just the word itself, standing alone, doing only what it had to do. I read it once. I set my phone face down on my desk. I went back to the policy report I was writing, which concerned updated temperature monitoring requirements for large-scale off-site catering operations across the state, and I kept working. There is something that nobody tells you about growing up in a family where one person takes up all the light. They don't tell you that you spend years believing the problem is the amount of light available, that there is only so much of it, that it has already been claimed, that your job is to learn to see in the dark and to stop wanting what was never meant for you. They don't tell you how long it takes to understand that the light was never finite. It was never limited. It was never something that could run out. It was just being hoarded, concentrated in one direction deliberately by people who had decided that was how love worked. Takes a long time to stop believing that. Longer than it should. But eventually, if you do the work, the real work, the quiet, unglamorous work that nobody sees until it matters, you start to understand that you were never in the dark because the light wasn't there. You were in the dark because someone was standing in front of it. I think about the woman I was on the night of that gala, standing in the back of the ballroom with a glass of sparkling water, watching the gold banner catch the chandelier light, watching my brother move through the crowd like a man who had written himself as the hero of every story he had ever lived. I was not there to destroy anything. I was not there with a plan drawn up and a speech rehearsed. I was there because I had been invited, because my mother had forwarded an email and I had said yes, and somewhere between the parking structure elevator and the ballroom door, I had made a decision that was quieter and more permanent than anything I had planned. I had decided to stop making myself small. My brother called me a lunch lady in front of 300 people, in front of the exact audience he most wanted to impress, and I let those same people know exactly who I was and exactly what I did and exactly what was sitting in the compliance file with his company's name on it. What happened after that was not my design. I did not engineer the consequences. I did not manufacture the outcome. I simply did my job at the moment I was permitted to do it, in the room where it needed to be done, and the truth moved through that space the way truth moves when it finally gets a microphone, quickly, completely, and without asking permission. I walked out into the October air that night and I did not feel victorious. Victory is loud. What I felt was something quieter than that. Something that had been held in tension for a very long time. Pulled taut across years of dinner tables and redirected conversations, and the particular silence that follows when someone says something designed to remind you of your place, and had finally been allowed to rest. The city is still there. The work is still there. Every morning now, I drive to the state office and I sit at a desk that is larger than my last one and I open files that cover the entire state, temperature logs, calibration reports, outbreak investigations, policy reviews, the unglamorous invisible infrastructure that keeps people safe in ways they will never think about. The work that matters most is almost always the work that no one sees. That is not a complaint. That is just the nature of foundations. You build in the quiet. You document in the quiet. You show up in the quiet year after year, doing the thing that needed doing. And the building goes up slowly and without ceremony and without anyone looking. And then one day, when the person who spent 30 years walking past your construction site finally looks up and asks what that is, they find that the foundation has already been poured. The walls are already standing. The roof has been on for years. And the only thing left for them to do is walk through the door you've been holding open, or stay outside in the cold. That choice was never mine to make. It was always his. And now, standing in the new office with the state seal on the wall, and a policy brief on my desk that will shape food safety standards for every catering operation in this state, I find that I am no longer waiting to see which choice he makes. I stopped waiting somewhere in that October parking garage, or maybe on the stage, or maybe in the years before either of those things, somewhere in the accumulated weight of all those quiet mornings at my desk, doing the work, building the thing, becoming the person that my brother never thought to ask about. I became her anyway. I became her in spite of everything. And she turned out to be exactly enough.